Okay, folks, thank you everyone for joining. I hope everyone can hear me loud and clear. My name is Philip Black. I am with TechD. With me today, I have Brian Mayer with IBM, who's part of the data governance data ops team. And today we've gathered here today to talk about the 5 best practices to help kickstart your data governance program. So we had a webinar about 6 weeks ago around IBM's data governance and quality platform called Watson Knowledge Catalog. And this was strictly around the solution itself, the product, the ins and outs of how you use it. We actually did a live demo, and we thought it would be a really good follow-up for us to have another session around data governance as a whole. So not just the product side of things, but the process side and the people side as well. And I know there's a lot of folks on the line here today who are probably at a different stage or at different stages within their governance journey, within their organization. And I don't use that word lightly. It is a journey going through data governance within your corporation itself. So we're gonna really talk about just the best practices, IBM's approach to data governance. We're gonna talk about sort of a maturity model and maturity assessment, and governance as a whole and how it relates to the product side as well. So what we're gonna do here today is I'm gonna end up passing over to Brian Mayer with the data ops team. He's gonna be going through some slides. We're gonna have Q&A open. So if anyone has any questions, just feel free to post your question in the chat, and I will also graciously interrupt Brian and we can answer questions on the fly, okay? And just a little bit of a high level, I wanted to go into who TechD is. So TechD is an IBM Premier Business Partner. We focus on anything and everything data related from an IBM perspective. So we really encompass the entire IBM data analytics stack. We resell, implement, design. We offer consulting and education to our clients. So we are truly an extension of the IBM analytics team. And here's just a little slide around, what we focus on, some of the solutions that we focus on as well. But data governance is one of our top priorities, especially just given the state of analytics and data compliance throughout every single industry. So with that being said, I want to thank everyone here today. We're going to record the session. Our call to action is a maturity assessment. So what the maturity assessment is, and Brian will give it a little bit more context, is we can actually send you the assessment and you fill it out from the client side. Where are you today from a data governance perspective? Do you have a data governance committee? What rules are in place? What policies are in place? And most important, what process is in place? The IBM North American governance team offers what we call a governance workshop. Obviously, with what's going on in the world today, we have been doing these virtually, but we've been having some great success. And we really just take the time to talk about how we can help you from a maturity perspective, from a governance perspective, and not really focus on that product side. Obviously, we try to bring that into the mix. We call it the 3 Ps, process, product, and people. It is a holistic view, but we'll be sending the maturity assessment out after the session here today. So with that being said, I am going to pass it over to you, Brian, and if there's any questions, please feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Thanks, Phil, and thank you everybody for joining. Phil, great introduction in terms of the content that we'll be talking about, and to what Phil said, we're giving you a great glimpse into the workshop that we conduct. Historically, we've done it in person. Obviously, within the new world, we've adapted and are doing that virtually now. So this session will give you a really great view into that workshop and what we do. So consider this kind of a small version of that workshop. And but as Phil said, there's some other things that we do to add value and provide you some good insight. So just real quick introduction. My name is Brian Mayer. I'm on what we call the IBM North America Data Ops sales team. And so what we do is we actually work with our customers to get them situated with not only the people process, but also the technology or solutions around data quality, data governance, and help them get going with that. So that's my role. And, you know, I tend to have more conversations on the people process side. I have colleagues that focus on the technology side, kind of like you know, Phil mentioned before, where we had a Watson Knowledge Catalog session and back in late April. And so my colleagues, you know, would have those conversations too. So typically we work together on these. So there's always the option of when we do our workshops, we can include the technology and show how that works hand in hand. So the screen that you see is really just a quick overview of what we're going to talk about. So I'll identify the primary use cases for data governance. I will talk about a methodology or practice called DataOps that IBM is strongly supporting, and give you a glimpse into that, define that for you, and obviously how that relates to data governance. And then we'll really get into the core portion of the session and talk about the 5 best practices and how they can help you kickstart your effort or help you enhance your current effort that you may be in the midst of the journey. So with that, let's go ahead and kick it off. So I always like to kick off my sessions with this slide, and many of my colleagues know this, that when we show this slide, we get a lot of smirks, laughter, hands running through the hair out of either frustration or, you know, satisfaction. You know, so being in this virtual world, not being on camera and not having everybody on camera, I'm not able to see, but I'm sure many understand what this particular slide denotes. Really, it's the concept or theme of garbage in, garbage out. So when we think about data governance and data quality initiatives or programs, we are absolutely addressing the issue around garbage in, garbage out, whether we are focused on the governance for compliance use case or the governance for insights use case. So we really boil it down to these 2 particular use cases. So whether or not you're focused on governance for compliance, which is really around either corporate mandates or federal regulations that exist today, many of us have had exposure to GDPR or CCPA or any kind of financial or banking regulations that are out there today, or even just simply corporate mandates that one has to do. So governance can certainly help put that in line with where the organization needs to be. Governance for insights is really around the how to optimize the usage of data within the organization. So making sure that you have high quality data that will help make decisions within an organization, either based on analytics or other types or other means. And, you know, this particular conversation sometimes gravitates more towards the governance for insights, but definitely applies for governance for compliance. So with that said, this is a depiction of the IBM AI ladder. And really, I don't intend to go through each step. Really, I have pulled this slide in here just to show where governance lives. Governance lives in the organized rung of the ladder, or that icon that kind of looks like a sideways raindrop, if you will, just to the left of the cloud. Essentially, you know, organized lives there because you have the collect rung of the ladder and the analyze rung of the ladder on both sides. And ultimately, we're trying to get how the data is coming into the organization, how it's being managed within the collect phase, and getting it to the analyze phase in a good quality state, as well as in an efficient state. So fast in the speed that the business needs it. And again, this is a situation where this can address both use cases that we've talked about, the compliance of the insight side. So the organized rung of the ladder, or really where, as I said, governance lives, is to ultimately deliver that business-ready data in a fast, efficient way. So making sure that the organization knows its data and the folks that live within that organization, that use that data, that they trust it, and then also being able to use it when they need it, how they need it, and that they have confidence in it. So let's dive a little bit deeper into the organized rung of the ladder, or where we're identifying the critical information architecture capabilities. So again, the no trust use framework and what falls within that. So I should point out, this is going to be the most technical slide you'll see, in the sense of where the technical capabilities reside within the organized rung of the ladder. So when we talk about the no portion, we focus on data governance and curation. Trust can encompass data quality, master data management, along with views being data integration, replication, and then ultimately having data prep for self-service and testing. And our ultimate goal here is to reduce the amount of time, reduce the amount of resources it takes to go from collect to analyze. And that's all supported by a catalog as well as a metadata management solution. And that's where Watson Knowledge Catalog comes in, as Phil mentioned earlier. So kind of the problem statement here, and I've already really made a comment around this or addressed this, but business users need to access high quality data fast. And really the primary source of the hiccup there, or the bottleneck there, are data pipelines. And typically to get data ingested, get it ready, put it in a high quality state, and then so it's ultimately usable, takes months to quarters, or multiple quarters, right? So we're looking to condense that. So what are the top challenges that are driving that bottleneck? This is a study that was done by IBM, and we asked just a sample of over 200 what their top challenges were within their data governance capabilities and their current architecture or framework. And that really, as we look at it, the top here is the increasing number of regulations that they need to deal with on a daily basis. And then that extends down to the processes are too manual. There's inconsistent data or lack of data quality metrics. There's lack of skills and resources to internally address those challenges. So really, at the end of the day, folks are focused on a whole slew of issues, and that extends into having that poor data quality having a negative impact on the business. The study shows 95% of organizations see negative impacts from poor data quality, which do result in wasted resources and additional costs, as well as having an impact on customer experience. So when we talk about customer experience, we mean focusing on ensuring the data quality is right, gaining consent from customers, being able to draw insight from the data that can be acted upon. So customer experience at the end of the day is very, very important. Even when we think about the regulations around CCPA, if the organization isn't compliant with that, and the consumer is trying to take their data out of that organization, and they're not able to, or they're not able to find out what data the organization has on them or that they maintain, that's going to amount to some frustration amongst that customer and having a negative impact on customer experience. So that's really kind of an example of what we mean by that. And then you can see some stats on the right-hand side here, where we talk about the biggest barriers for using data to justify change, and data governance being at the top of that list, with data quality being around 50% as well. So as I mentioned, this is really a process or a practice methodology that IBM has supported. So when we talk about going from that collect to analyze phase and condensing that phase and making it more efficient within the organized rung of the ladder, we're talking about DataOps. So DataOps is really this collaborative effort practice that's focused on improving communication, integration, automation of data flows between those data managers and consumers. And with the ultimate goal to consistently delivering high quality data fast. So moving from those months and quarters to ultimately hours and days. So DataOps expedites the delivery of that high quality data by streamlining data pipeline processes, automating core operations, as well as enabling collaborative communication across key stakeholders and subject matter experts. So really to sum it all up, when we talk about data ops or we talk about getting to a business ready data state, it's really about having the right data in the right place at the right time. So the whole DataOps methodology, the whole DataOps practice is really focused on doing just this. And there are, we talked about a couple action items following this where we can offer up, workshops, we can offer up assessments, but there's also an opportunity where we have a DataOps Center of Excellence, where we conduct workshops on going beyond even just focusing on how to set up data governance practice, but also how to set up the DataOps methodology within the organization. So that's something that we can talk about as well if you have interest in doing so after this session. Okay, so I've set the stage a little bit with, focusing on what use cases data governance addresses or where we primarily focus, the methodology behind it, DataOps. And now we're going to talk about the 5 best practices. So the 5 best practices really reside in the IBM data governance framework model, which you see here. It's depicting, or supposed to be depicting, a funnel and really 3 layers. So we have our best practices at the top, we have our data preparation in the middle, and then we have how technology comes into play. As I mentioned, we will only focus on this top layer of business need, maturity level, executive sponsorship, roadmap, and operating model. And the one thing that I want to point out here before I start digging into each one of these is that those small blue arrows that you see at the top of each of those, that's really to depict that you can really enter this framework at any of those stages. That it's not necessarily a situation where you have to move from left to right. You could have an executive sponsor to start off, and then you work your way into a business need. But ultimately, you want to have all 5 of these areas really before you start digging into solidifying the data prep and technology utilization. That's not to say that you can't start planning for those other 2 levels, but you certainly want to have a really good understanding of where you are with that top level and those best practices. Okay, so business need. What do we mean by business need? So I'm sure many of you have heard that you don't want to do governance for governance sake. It is as Phil mentioned, a journey, but it also can be a very difficult journey in regards to selling in the need for it internally and actually accomplishing the tasks that you need to. So having a true business need articulated in business terms is key. So designing the data governance scope around a specific business problem is ultimately where we're recommending that you focus. And what we mean by that essentially is the example that I used earlier with customer experience. So say that you have a initiative or a strategic initiative within the organization to enhance the experience that the customer has when contacting the organization, either through phone, web, mail, so on and so forth, right? So let's say we need to optimize the quality of data in that space so that when an individual calls in, we have a better understanding for who they are and what type of products or services that they have. So that would be what we would call designing the governance scope around that specific business need or problem. And with that said, we want to make sure that we are focusing on tying that business need to business value, assuring that there's a linkage between the governance program and ultimately what the business outcome or business value is. So a great example here is tying the governance metrics, data quality metrics that one would have, and tying those to key performance indicators for the overall business. So what are some, if you think about some of the KPIs for your organization and what you focus on or what your executives focus on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, assuring that you have governance metrics tied to those KPIs is going to ultimately be key and help prove out the success of your governance program. And with that said, and when we talk about communicating or celebrating successes, we want to do so with confidence, right? When we start off in our governance journey, we want to start small. And this is something that you've probably heard before, but what we mean by this is when we have our workshops, for example, as a portion of the workshop, we sit down and we talk about what are the specific use cases within the organization that governance can address. And then we prioritize those. We prioritize those in terms of the level of exposure that those use cases have, but also the level of value that they have, and determine the level of success one can have quickly so that you can start showing some small wins quickly or over time to show how governance is proving out value for the organization. So starting small, celebrating and communicating those successes to the powers that be within the organization that will ultimately help you get additional resources. And then these are just some quick examples of governance or quality metrics that one could use and that could ultimately tie up into those business KPIs. And I believe we will provide this deck after the session and give you access to it so that you can take a much more in-depth look at these. And then we talk about adding value. These are just a few examples that I pulled in to show you the value that data governance can bring to the organization after some of the best practices are applied and after the program has some level of maturity. So the first example here is an organization that was able to create a business glossary, and they were able to do it in 85% less time with the methodology of DataOps Incorporated. And by having that amount of time reduction and creating that business glossary on an annualized basis, they were able to save the organization over $3 million. So a very similar situation in the next example where we had a 90% reduction in time to discover metadata and assign terms. So ultimately, that amount of time helped save that organization $1 million, so on an annualized basis. And some of the other examples we have here, being able to apply governance and apply the DataOps methodology, identifying 200,000 technical assets across multiple clouds, and how that was discovered in less than 5 minutes. So a significant amount of time savings there. And then the last example here, we have a 2-hour turnaround on investment, where a particular organization was able to uncover the fact that they had unprotected PHI or PII data, and they basically said that they paid for the solution and the time that they put into it within 2 hours, just based on finding what they found throughout that process. So that was really a focus on the best practice around defining the business need. The second area, or second best practice, is around maturity level and understanding where the organization currently resides. And here we do highly recommend, no matter where you are within the organization, and some of you may have already taken the time to do an assessment, which is fantastic. So what we suggest is, understanding where you are today with multiple attributes, and as Phil mentioned, we can certainly share that assessment with you. But what we do is we say, okay, as a team, we're going to assess us on all these different levels, whether or not it's specifics around data quality, where we have governance today, where we don't have governance today. What is the organization's viewpoint on data overall? Does the organization have a data strategy? And so we score that on a 4-point scale and then we compare that to ultimately where you want to be as an organization, and we start identifying the gaps. So really a gap analysis around the data governance effort. And so this can really help identify the risks and help outlay the mitigation plans for the governance program, and then ultimately help you capture some resources or gain some resources to enhance the governance effort. So this is our maturity model, or this is essentially how we do the assessment. We base it on these 4 different areas and where you fall within each of those attributes that we would share. So going from either no data ops or a siloed effort, or foundational data ops, or a reactive effort, developed data ops or proactive effort, and then advanced data ops, or what we would call a business ready state. So fully functional governance program. I think we all would agree that we would love to be at the top. Our experience shows us that many organizations do start at the bottom with siloed efforts. You know, in the world of, you know, spreadsheets and hand coding, we do work with a lot of folks that are, you know, in really a good position, either between reactive and proactive, that are ultimately working to get to that business ready state, but just need a little help doing so. So the third area around the best practices is executive sponsorship. And if you were to ask me to rank the 5 in terms of importance, I would put executive sponsorship at the top. Yes, identifying a business need is important, but having an executive sponsor to support the governance program is vital to its success. You want to make sure that that executive sponsor understands the value. You show them the value to gain their and maintain their support, and you can do so. You can identify these sponsors through key business initiatives or those use cases that you identify and prioritize. And ultimately, that executive sponsor is going to be your champion for your governance program, to get you resources, to communicate those successes for you, and to ultimately bring in additional use cases so that you can grow the program into an enterprise effort. The fourth area, the 4th best practice, is building a roadmap or defining what the guardrails and guideposts are for the governance program. So what a roadmap is really going to do, it's going to outline that people, process, and technology task that we've been talking about. It's going to create those guardrails and guideposts to assist with setting the rules, or I'm sorry, the policies and rules and the standards that the governance program is going to set so that data can be managed appropriately. And what I've done is I've pulled in a few simple examples of what we mean by those. Anywhere from defining data is a company asset. So as you think about like a data governance charter, these would be sort of the pillars within that charter, if you will, or the foundation of that charter, to say, here's what we are going to do, here's what we are not going to do, here's how data is going to be seen and perceived within the organization. Some of the ones that I really like to point out here in the middle on the right, data quality is everyone's responsibility. So when we talk about stewardship, data stewards in the organization, this really is a statement around making sure that everybody within the organization is a steward. Data is validated where necessary and is corrected and made complete. So if one sees an issue with data quality, they can raise their hand and they know where to go to either report that or remediate that. And so the fifth and final area of best practices is really around establishing the operating model. So identifying or putting together the structure in which you're going to implement that data strategy, in which you're going to implement that data governance effort. It's going to serve as that foundation for your overall data management and stewardship. So identifying the what, we talked about the business need. It's going to identify the where data resides, where it should reside, where it's going to be cleansed and curated, ultimately how you're going to do that, when you're going to do that, and why you're going to do that. And in the center of all of that is who, right? So we are going to talk about the who here, really, establishing that governance council. So who are the senior stakeholders above and beyond the core data governance team? Who are the executive sponsors, and who's going to have a role in establishing the day-to-day governance? So who's going to be that working group? And defining what those ongoing data quality rules and policies and standards are going to be, and identifying their alignment to the business-driven KPIs that we talked about earlier. And then this governance council, or this operating model, is going to help establish that stewardship practice. So we talked about data stewards very, very briefly, but assuring that we've identified the data stewards, who is going to be a part of that day-to-day governance working group, and what groups are they representing? So how are they going to be aligned? Are they going to be aligned by IT? Are they going to be aligned by line of business? And so this particular best practice will identify that. So what the operating model is going to say, how that governance program is going to be structured, what the reporting model is going to be. Okay. So those are the 5 best practices. As I mentioned, there's really not a defined starting point. But as if I were to prioritize those, I would certainly start with finding the executive sponsor, defining that business need, and then going from there, understanding your maturity level, and start to identifying the roadmap. Where is the governance program ultimately going to take you? And starting where the maturity level, the maturity model or assessment will help you identify where you are today, and the roadmap will help you eliminate those gaps that you identify, as will the operating model. And then you can start really focusing on the data prep and the solutions that are going to help you throughout that process. So those are the 5 best practices, and that's all the content that I have. I am not able to see the chat right now, but we are certainly open to taking some questions. Phil, I know you've been monitoring the chat. Any questions that have come up during the session?
I don't see any questions right now, but I have a statement question that I think a lot of people might be interested in. So hypothetical, if I'm an organization and I want to get started with data governance, there's the people side, there's a process side, and there's obviously the technology side. Would you say that it's best practice to invest in a solution in tandem while you're really getting these best practices in place? Would you say that you have a recommendation from a starting point of people should get the people and the process in place first and then technology, or vice versa? Or is it different depending on the situation?
Well, I'll give the consultant answer. It depends, right? I mean, that's ultimately it. But where we see we see the people, process, and technology working hand in hand, and we don't see the technology solving everyone's problems without the people and process, and we don't see the people and process solving everyone's problems without the technology. So we see them working well together. We would certainly recommend starting understanding where you are from a maturity perspective, and understanding, and defining what you want to do with the governance effort. As I mentioned, you don't want to do governance for governance sake, and then you certainly don't want to buy a solution without having some key objectives. So, really they go hand in hand, and that's not to say that, technology doesn't play a huge role here, and I think it does. So, it just ultimately depends on the situation and where you are in the process.
Okay. So we do have a question from Alejandro. How would you suggest that a small organization without this knowledge should start implementing data governance?
Well, I would certainly take stock in the 5 best practices. I mean, I think really taking an opportunity to say, okay, what ultimately are we trying to do here? And, I think small, medium, or large organizations are going to benefit from doing that and having a governance effort. Prior to me joining IBM, I worked at an organization and in a group that had some data challenges, and it would have been we would have been much more efficient having a data glossary, some data quality rules assigned, and I think so any size organization taking a step back and understanding, and defining how governance can help and determining what value that it can bring to the organization and defining that. I think that's one of those first key steps. So without knowing more, I mean, that would probably be my best answer right now.
Yeah, understood. And I think you make a really good point around starting small and understanding key objectives. So, right, if you're in an organization, you really want to find what's the quickest path to success from a data governance perspective. Starting small, not boiling the ocean, having a quick win and being able to socialize that throughout the organization and then replicating that across the business, right? We have another question from Deb. What if the business rules contained in the technology does not support an optimal process? Do you have to make the process fit with the technology limitations? That's a good question.
I'm not quite sure I'm following that one. Phil,
So
I
think what she's stating is, so what if the business rules contained in the technology does not support the optimal process? So essentially, what if they have technology in place for data governance, but it does not align to the process that fits with what they want to do from a people and process perspective, right? Technology limitations, right? Maybe they have a tool in-house that doesn't support specific needs through their governance program. I would say this is being totally blunt, but you might want to reevaluate the technology that's in-house, or seeing what technology is in the marketplace to help augment and maybe add on to that, right? So we have a lot of customers who are investing in a data catalog solution, but they're not investing in the data quality perspective. From an IBM perspective, I think everything from a metadata perspective needs to sort of work in tandem together, right? You can't have one without the other. But yeah, I think you should probably do a technology evaluation and just understand if it aligns with what you need to do from a business perspective. Okay, do we have any other questions? Yes, we do have one more. Okay, how would you suggest a company manage kickoff transition from strong IT documents to a business data glossary? The task is daunting. Where to begin while still having a DGC running? Data Governance Committee, I'm assuming. So essentially,
this is
a strong IT document to a business glossary. So I think they probably built their own glossary in-house, potentially, just from an IT perspective, but it's not really aligned to the business.
Yeah, and I think one, certainly have seen this situation in the past. This is a common issue where an organization has multiple terms that they want to have put into a glossary. There might be situations where there's different groups within an organization that use the same term or same terminology. Customer is a great example. How does one define customer? Whether or not you're in sales or whether or not you're in, call it supply chain or finance, right? So when deciding whether or not you're ultimately going to have governance in silos, or if you're going to have an enterprise-wide governance program, there's going to be a need to help further define what those terms are. And that is a daunting task. It's a matter of getting those groups together and agreeing on not only the definition of those terms, but deciding on how to separate the terminology or further enhance the definition or further enhance the term, maybe make an additional term, however the organization sees fit. But there has to be a lot of discussion and agreement as to how to handle that process. So yes, it is daunting. However, the technology has advanced quite a bit in terms of, for example, the Watson Knowledge Catalog tool. So having the ability to do, auto term identification and classification and helping with that process to make it a little less daunting and making suggestions as to, how they should be defined or what terms should be, how they should be aligned. And there's even technology that can give you the opportunity to have different catalogs for the different parts of the organization. So the task is a little less daunting with a solution, but without a solution, it certainly can be complex.
Yeah, and it's a really good question. It's a really good answer too. So, with the newest release of Watson Knowledge Catalog, it's really a collaborative platform. IBM has really designed this for IT and the business users to work together and have that same language across the business. And the user experience is really geared towards that typical business user. We have another question from Brian. How would you define the roles and responsibilities for the business? Business is concerned about how much time they need to dedicate towards data governance.
So I could probably answer that question with a question. I think it ultimately depends on how much the business wants to be involved in the governance effort. And I think there's different levels of that. I came from the line of business world and understand the needs and the time that, the main job that you have or main responsibilities that one has to, making decisions within the daily part of the day and for the organization, and then having to incorporate responsibilities around the governance program. So that's where the data governance team plays a large effort. That's where data stewards play a large effort. But the different lines of business, they certainly can help with defining what the governance program is going to help them with, defining those metrics, helping tie the specific quality metrics to those KPIs within the organization, helping define those processes. And, again, if they want to play a role, they should be part of the governance program. They should be potentially either a steward, let's say it's an analyst within a marketing department. Let's say they have a strong sense for the data, and they should play a heavy role in understanding the data and being able to identify quality issues and defining those rules. So the roles and responsibilities that the different lines of business have can vary, but it's ultimately what value that they want to bring to that and to the organization.
Okay, we have one more follow-up question from Bev, who asked around the transition. With the tools, isn't it only as good as having base of how to structure the data within the glossary first? Is there a best practice that you can share?
Phil, do you want to take that one? You have any experiences with that?
So let me see if I can understand this. With the tools, isn't it as only good as having base of how to structure the data within the glossary first? So I'd say yes, and I don't know if I'm fully understanding the question here. I think what you're asking is what type of data should be going into the glossary? What terms should the business be coming up with? And it's only as good as the terms and the data that you guys agree upon as an organization to go into the glossary. So how do you organize the data within the glossary? Okay. So from an organization perspective, within the tool itself, you can create your own catalogs, okay? But I guess you're asking from a glossary perspective. That's a really good question. How do you organize data? I think from the people and process side, your group within your organization is going to want to understand what type of data that you're going to be putting in that glossary. Because it's not like it's going to be an enterprise data warehouse where you're dumping all of your data into the catalog. What your organization is going to want to do is understand what data is valuable, what data is specific towards compliance needs, what data is specific towards certain insights that you're trying to accomplish within the business, right? So you are going to have that master catalog within your organization, but there are going to be subsets to specific business analysts and data scientists for data that's only important to them. So there is going to be multiple catalogs within your organization. I hope that helps, Bev. Okay. Is there any other questions? We had some really good questions, Brian. No? Okay. All right. Well, listen, thank you everyone for joining. We had a really good turnout today. We had some really, really good questions. We will be sending out the deck that we covered today. If you'd like to participate in a maturity assessment within your organization, we can send you the documentation. It's probably a 15 to 20 minutes exercise with various individuals within your organization, but it's a great starting point, right? And no matter where you are within your governance journey, if you just invested in a tool and you're kicking off a practice, that's fine. If you guys are in your 10th or 12th year of having a governance committee, it's still valuable because it is an ongoing process as new data sources are coming in, new people are coming in, and new policies and new compliance needs happen as well. So we'll be sending the deck out shortly, and if you'd like to participate, please let us know. All right. Thank you everyone for joining. I appreciate it and have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.